So that's what matters. I am so pleased that so many people will take time in their summer and their evenings to come and hear from this wonderful panel of experts. I have heard them a couple of times in the last 2 days, and I'm just so appreciative of their expertise and their scholarship and their willingness to share it with us, and I know that you'll be grateful that you came tonight. As is the custom in the Senate, every day when we convene, we begin with a prayer and a pledge. And we're going to follow that format tonight. I always like the meeting to begin with a prayer and a pledge. I just have to say, since one of our guests is from Massachusetts, that when I attended grade school in Massachusetts, after the prayer and pledge, we also had a scripture reading from the Bible in our classroom. And that wasn't that long ago. How much times have changed just in my lifetime. But we will start tonight with prayer. Kristen Sheffield will do the opening prayer, and Oak Norton will give the pledge of allegiance.
Our dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to be here and to be able to voice our opinions and to hear different points of view and to discuss issues that impact us and our communities. And we ask thee to bless thy spirit to be with us, that we'll have a spirit of kindness and understanding, and that we will have the ability to discern truth and error and to be able to make up our minds on this issue and to be able to move forward and make right decisions for our community. And we thank you for the people who have come so far at their own expense and have been willing to share their research and their experience and information with us. And we ask that blessing on them, that they will be able to share it in a way that they will be pleased with and that will be pleasing unto thee. And we ask these things and thank you for all that we have in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Before we recite the pledge, I'd just like to say something really quick and ask a question. Do we have any veterans in the audience? We have a few. Thank you very much for your service. You're probably aware, but you are now authorized to salute the flag during the pledge, even when you're out of uniform. So you can call that. I'd also like to just ask a favor as we say the pledge. There's a tradition in our country to put an incorrect pause in a certain phrase of the Pledge of Allegiance. It is one nation under God. And there is no comma in that phrase, and so if, as we recite the pledge, we can say one nation under God without a pause, because we only exist as one nation if we're under God. So if you would please stand and recite the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Oak. Thank you, Oak, for that reminder of how to say the pledge. And thanks also to the veterans who are here. I'm glad you can all again. As you will know in the program, we are going to have a musical number, and it's going to be sung by Carol Pope, who is an award-winning performing artist, and she has sung with the National Symphony Orchestra, but she's going to sing for us tonight. However, before she sings, I would just like to say that there are some people that need to be acknowledged. You note on your program the Utah Education Coalition, of which Representative Keith Grover is the chair, consists of several groups who have been involved in organizing and sponsoring this event. This Education Coalition meets every week during the legislative session, and we're very grateful for their involvement. I would also like to acknowledge with appreciation some parent activists extraordinaire who have been involved in this. Elisa Ellis has put this event together, and the time will be turned over to her after the musical number. She has also been working with Crystal Swayze and Renee Brady and Ken Neverker and Oak Norton, who you all probably know is also a parent activist extraordinaire. It just pleases me that we have people who care enough about what's going on to take the time to educate themselves and to organize all of us and to provide provide this opportunity. So Lisa will take over the program and introduce our panel after we hear the music from Carol. Carol, thank you for joining us.
Please stand with me. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to get up after that. Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And I would be ungrateful if I didn't thank Margaret for her kind words and also acknowledge there are so many people besides the 4 or 5 that she mentioned that have been working on this tirelessly and giving it countless hours studying, and I appreciate all of those, and it is much more than a few individuals. And I would like to thank these men for coming out here. I really appreciate it. This is incredible. That we as citizens can put something like this together to discuss issues and to voice our concerns and share with others things that we find and to value, have the same values and beliefs, and those that may not believe as us, we can debate on this together and come up with our own opinions and beliefs on this based on research. And it's so important to look at all sides of every issue. And so we're here to present the other side to what the State School Board and those who are mentioning about it. And so it's just dear to my heart because I have put many hours into this. And I started looking into this because I just could see some issues with my children. And so I just had some questions. And I started doing some research And the original issues I had paled in comparison to what I was finding. And I started talking to many people in our state and have developed many good friendships through that. And I also started talking to many people nationally. And I started talking to them to ask questions about some of their research and to share with them some of the findings that I had and then invited them to come out. And I really do appreciate you making this trip. It is so wonderful. And we will first hear from Emma McRory. He is an attorney and senior director at American Principles Project, and he developed formative analysis on the roles of private, federal, and state interests played in the development of Common Core. He introduced an ALEC legislation to defeat Common Core. Jamie Gass will be our next speaker, so he's this one over here. We're not quite in order. He is the director of the Pioneer Institute Center for School Reform in Boston, Massachusetts. He also worked at the Boston University School of Education for the management team in its partnership with the Chelsea Public Schools. Dr. Bill Evers is seated here, and he is a research fellow at Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy from 2007 to 2009 and ran school systems in Iraq, the school system in Iraq, in 2003. Kent Talbert, down on the end, he practices law focusing on the K-12 education sector. And he was the General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Education from 2006 to 2009, where he acted as Chief Advisor to Secretary Margaret Spelling. Anyways, I'll turn the time over to Emmett, and thank you again. After they give you some information, so please, if you have questions, jot them down, make a note of the things that you would like to ask.
Thank you, Lisa. Can everyone hear me? No? Yes? Yes. All right, thank you. There's kind of two groups of issues here. There's the standards and assessments. Assessments are really standardized tests. And the other thing that's going on here is the constitutional process and the relationship between the federal government and the state government. And the Supreme Court, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, has become increasingly concerned that the federal government is overreaching and is stepping into the territory of the states. And I don't think we see that any more egregiously than what's happened here. And I would submit to you, at the end of the day, this is really a constitutional issue. This is really about whether or not we are going to stand and defend the Declaration and the Constitution. It's that important, and what has been done is so pervasively against our structure. So I ask you to listen and to participate in the Q&A, but most importantly, I plead with you, whether or not you agree with us, I plead with you to go home and continue to look into this issue. I think you will be amazed at what you find, as Elisa was saying. And then I ask you to, this is patriot time. This is time to stand up and defend our country, defend our Constitution and our Declaration, or let it just be a vestige of history. So what we're talking about here at the core of it is standards and assessments. And standards are essentially instructions to teachers. Assessments are standardized tests, and that measure whether or not the standards are being taught. 17 years ago, and as you all know, education is historically a local matter, perhaps a state matter, but not a federal government under our structure. About 17 years ago, a group got together and decided that we needed national standards, and that everyone needed to be taught according to what the federal government decided they should be taught. That's kind of perverse in our system because it's, as I said, it's usually, under our Constitution, it's a local matter. It's left to the states and there's an understanding it would be a local matter. Why? Of course, because this, fundamentally what we're talking about is the parent-child relationship. So when we say national standards, what we're doing is we're taking accountability, or we're taking authority away from the parent, the local community, and giving it to the federal government. So 17 years ago, there was an attempt to have history standards. And it was making, getting a lot of steam, and then some people caught wind of what was going on and looked at them, among them Lynn Cheney, and they stood up and they said these standards are bad. The Senate voted on them and they defeated it, 99-1. So that movement didn't die. It kind of lurked in the shadows. And in 2006, Governor Hunt of North Carolina kind of took it up as a cause, and then he recruited the National Governors Association, which is a trade association, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, another trade association. And it's important to note they have official sounding names, but they're trade associations. They sound as if they have a grant of authority from the states, each of the states, but they don't. And then they enlisted the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Bill and Melinda Gates started funding this effort. And their total funding on this, and Bill Gates had a prior education effort that completely failed. But their total funding by the Gates Foundation alone on this is in excess of $100 million. Gone in large part to CCSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Governors Association, and ACHIEVE, kind of a policy, education policy group formed by the National Governors Association. Now that amount of money alone, just from the Gates Foundation, far exceeds the amount of money that any one state has given to the National Governors Association or Council of Chief State School Officers, or that the states collectively have given to it. So you just got to think, well, who's calling the shots there? So then it was all pretty much in some ways a theoretical matter. But in 2008, President Obama won election. And in the transition to election, the National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers produced a document called Benchmarking for Success. Basically, it was a strategy document for the Common Core State Standards Initiative for Race to the Top. And it was adopted by the Obama administration. And from that point on, you had a cartel, basically. A cartel of the National Governors Association, the Obama administration, Council of Chief State School Officers, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But they still needed kind of power or a way of driving this into the states. And that came about 2.5 weeks after President Obama took office in the form of the 2009 stimulus bill. That bill gave a largely discretionary grant to the Department of Education of $4.35 billion. By discretionary means, the Department of Education had a lot of leeway as to how to spend it. So then the following week, Arne Duncan is on C-SPAN.
He's the Secretary of Education.
Oh, sorry, he was the Secretary of Education, and he's on C-SPAN, and the host says, well, Secretary Duncan, how do you envision spending this money? And what he said is, well, I really like the work that National Governors Association and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has done on national standards, the Common Core State Standards Initiative. I really like that, and I want to be the catalyst to make that happen. So that's how we're going to spend the money, and we'll put out the details later. So then the Department of Education started sending people to the state boards of education, encouraging them to go to a meeting that the National Governors Association was hosting, and told them, well, please go to this meeting. It's going to be about developing national standards. And so the states sent people to listen to the meeting, and these delegates had produced a memorandum where the states committed themselves to developing national standards. And then Bill Gates, in I think it was July 2009, gave a grant to Achieve, that policy group formed by the National Governors Association, to draft the standards. So it was this group of people basically that had been working on the Common Core State Standards Initiative before President Obama got elected. So they got this grant to write the standards. And they gave the state boards of education and departments of education, I call it suggestion box input. We'll have conference calls with you, we'll have meetings, give us your suggestions. But it was those group of people who wrote the standards. So they started writing them in July, and by March 2010, they had a draft of the standards, which is quite fast, and I would submit to you, impossible if we're being written by 48 states. But anyway, so then the Obama administration announced the details of its Race to the Top program, the grant program.
And this is the program funded by the stimulus money.
The program funded by the stimulus money. And in many ways, it was like the usual carrot and stick program the federal government puts out. You know, we'll give you this money if you do this, but there were a couple twists to it. First of all, it's in that climate of the states of financial Armageddon. The states are told that they're all going bankrupt, the economy is going down the chutes, and the federal government's saying, well, we're here to rescue you. We're going to give you money. But here on education, they said, they didn't quite say that. They said, well, we have $4.35 billion, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to let you compete for it. That's perverse. We have some of your taxpayers' money here, and we're going to let you compete for it. Well, if it's our taxpayers' money, why don't you just give it to us? Why do I have to compete for it? Then they said, here's how you're going to compete for it. We have these policy changes we would like to see. We would like to see national standards. We would like to see you sign on to national standards and commit yourself to it. We would like to see you use standardized tests that are aligned with those standards to make sure your children learn what we want them to learn, and that they learn it how we want it taught to them. Then here's the twist I like. Well, you have to commit your state to that regardless of whether you were going to win the money. So you thought you didn't win the money, but you still committed to it in Race to the Top 1 and Race to the Top 2. But that's not all. Then they said, oh yeah, another thing, you're going to have to commit yourself to these products, these standards, and these assessments before they're drafted. And it's not like Boeing or Ford or Government Motors. They didn't have a history of having these products. So then in November 2009, the first grant announcement was put out, and it was due January 2010. And just to pump up the troops and make sure everyone was enthused about it, in 2010, President Obama and Ari Duncan said, oh, by the way, in the future, I think what we're going to try to do is tie Title I money to whether or not a state has adopted our education reforms.
So clarify what Title I money is.
Title I money is a huge formula grant of money that goes automatically to the states to assist the education of poor children, needy children, and it's a big part of any state's budget. So just as a little coercive icing on the cake. So that was January 2010, and a bunch of states applied to Race to the Top, committed their states to these assessments and standards. March 2010, the first draft of the standards came out. So after the commitment, and oh, by the way, the assessment drafts or the assessment products still haven't come out. Then in June 1, 2010, the second round of Race to the Top applications was due. And Utah applied to that as well. The next day, June 2nd, 2010, was when the final version, the final draft of the standards was released. So a bunch of states had committed to it, of course, the day before. And then the federal government gave the states 2 months after that June 1st date. They gave 2 months in which to formally adopt the standards. So, and then here's the part on formal adoption of the standards. So the states are sitting here saying, okay, well, we have 2 months for our State Board of Education to vote on these standards. So here's what we have to do in 2 months. We have to take our existing standards, we have to compare them to the Common Core, and we have to see and evaluate which one is better. And of course, the American tradition, the whole purpose of the Constitution and the whole purpose of the Constitution and the compound system of government, state governments and federal governments, is to ensure, or one of the purposes is to ensure that the people and their elected representatives get notice as to what government is doing and have an opportunity to weigh in. So in this 2 month period of time, that's what the state boards of education had to do. And they also had to, I would say in good faith, they had to notify their legislatures as to what was happening. Why would they have to notify them? Well, the administration was quite clear that what we were talking about was, their words, not mine, a transformation of how every child is taught. So one would think the legislature should be notified that something this radical was going on. And also, not to mention the people, the citizens of Utah, in good conscience, should have been notified and should have been asked to weigh in. But there wasn't time to do that in a 2 month period. State Board of Education had to make a very quick decision to sign on or not. That's the process of, that's an outline of the process of what happened. I know I've taken up a lot of time, but I do want to just highlight a couple of things. When we talk about the standards, there's a couple of issues going on. There's the quality of the standards, the technical quality of the standards, but there's also another issue, and that's the content of what they're pushing down. And on the English language arts standards, the Common Core brings in a radical shift in what children are learning. It's a shift from classic literature to informational text. Classical literature is I would say it's at the very foundation of our republic, in the sense that it helps children to investigate their surroundings. It teaches them prudential decision-making. It teaches them empathy. It teaches them how to exercise their liberties. And about the Common Core, Anthony Esolen, thank you. And informational texts are things like Federal Reserve releases, computer manuals, and this is again the Gates philosophy. All children need is information. So it's just straight information. This is what Anthony Esolen, professor of English at Providence University, said about the Common Core. What appalls me most about the Common Core standards is the cavalier contempt for great works of human art and thought in literary form. It is a sheer ignorance of the life of the imagination. We are not programming machines. We are teaching children. We are not producing functionaries, factory-like. We are to be forming the minds and hearts of men and women. Frankly, I do not wish to be governed by people whose minds and hearts have been stunted by a strictly utilitarian miseducation. This is what we're faced with. Are we going to have a European system of education, or are we going to have an American system of education?
Just a little more separation between you and the mic. Sorry. He gets very passionate. That's why.
Like Elise, I get passionate because I see this as whether or not we're going to stand for the Constitution and the Declaration, whether or not we're going to allow the federal government and special interests to intrude on the parent-child relationship. And I just want to conclude before I pass it to Jamie. Sutherland Institute, which is a highly respected national reputation as a policy organization, is based here in Utah. Yesterday came out with a report on the Common Core. And I'll just read a sentence from that, a couple sentences. It says, the state is creating unnecessary risks for children by giving up its autonomy over public education to other states, the federal government, and private interest groups. Utah is at a critical decision point. The longer it waits to change course, the more difficult it will be. To maintain Utah's independence, the state should immediately exit Common Core and all agreements related to it. That will happen if the people in this room get involved.
So my name is Jamie Gass. I'm the director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer
Can't
Institute.
hear you.
Oh. How's this? A little better? Yeah. So my name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute, which is a Boston-based think tank. But I first want to begin by thanking you for coming out on a weeknight and to illustrate and to show everyone your interest in why we're all here, which is our children and our grandchildren. We love our children.
Real quick, can I steal this? We will be making this recording available so you don't feel like you have to take copious notes. It will be available. Thank you. Sorry.
Also, please put on vibrate or turn off your cell phone.
So we're all here tonight because we love our children and our grandchildren, and we care about our country and the principles on which it was founded. And I've got to say that we have been working in a half dozen states or so across the country, and the kind of reception that we have gotten and the kind of leadership that you've had here in Utah is really quite remarkable. And I want to note that. In particular, I want to note the work of Elisa and Renee and Cammie and others. They really have done a terrific job, and they do really deserve a round of applause. So in the 1830s, Alexis de Tocqueville, a French aristocrat, came to the United States to examine our prison system. And he ended up realizing that there was a great deal more that he wanted to explore. And he looked at and developed, ultimately it was a very influential book called Democracy in America. And one of the fundamental observations that he made about our democracy and how different it was from a European system of government is that the ideas and the principles really came from the people and from the civic organizations and the churches. And I really want to highlight that a lot of what we see tonight is an illustration that that is still alive and well. But in a lot of ways, what de Tocqueville is talking about is in direct contrast, and what he observed about the United States is in direct contrast to what it is that the folks in the Common Core have in mind. They have in mind very much a top-down, a kind of command and control approach to education and education reform, which for the last 200 some odd years has been the legal jurisdiction of states and localities. So again, I work for Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank. We do independent research. We accept no money from any government at any different level. We're all privately funded. It allows us to use research and data to drive policymaking and decision-making. As you may or may not know, Massachusetts in the last 20 years has been engaged in an enormous education reform effort, and it took it basically from being an average performing or slightly above average performing state to the very highest performing state in the Union on almost every measure of students' academic achievement. So there's a test called the NAEP test. It's the nation's report card. And in every administration of the test from 2005 until 2011, in every grade tested, Massachusetts was #1. No state had ever done it once, and Massachusetts did it 4 times in a row. And then on top of that, we tested as a country, an independent country in 2008 on the TIMSS test, which is an international math and science test. And our students did very well. They were among the best in the world. And our 8th graders were tied for first in the world in science. And it was really the hard-won work that we did in the 90s. And Pioneer played a leading role in developing the standards and developing the charter schools and many of the teacher tests and the accountability measures that helped Massachusetts succeed. But it was really that commitment to high-quality academic standards and to high-quality tests for both teachers and students, and the alignment of those three that allowed us to do as well as we have done. So when the Common Core came down several years ago, we immediately had an interest in it, obviously, because we had the most to lose in some respects. So what we did is we enlisted Sandra Stotsky, who was the person who developed all of the standards in Massachusetts. She had been appointed to the State Board of Education by former Governor Romney. And I would note that former Governor Romney's Lieutenant Governor and his campaign manager both serve on Pioneer's Board of Trustees, even though we are a nonprofit that is independent and nonpartisan. But I think it's important for you to understand that in terms of context. So we enlisted Sandra Stotsky to look at the English language arts standards in Massachusetts, and then we enlisted Jim Milgram and Zev Werman. These are 2 experts in mathematics and engineering from California to look at Common Core and to evaluate Common Core in ELA and math in Massachusetts, Indiana, Texas, other high standard states at every step of this very quick development that they were pushing for Common Core. So we did 4 different evaluations, and every step of the way, at every step, Common Core was of much lower academic quality than what Massachusetts and other high standard states had. We did not look at Utah, but I can tell you that the Utah math standards in particular are higher than what Common Core offered. And even the proponents of national standards have acknowledged that. So what are some of the characteristics of what were so good about the Massachusetts ELA standards? And I'll let Dr. Evers talk about the math standards in a little more detail. But what was so unique about the ELA standards in Massachusetts is that 90% of what students were studying was classic literature. Massachusetts is a state with a long tradition, Longfellow and Melville and a variety of other noted literary figures. And so it's an integral part of the identity of our state. But it's also important because children learn about human nature by reading high-quality literature. Only in literature can you understand the human condition, the human characters in conflict, and in testing their their character and their identity against various kinds of struggles. These are not the kinds of things that you can learn from Federal Reserve texts or computer manuals. The thing that's also unique about literature, particularly in the early grades, is that the quality of the vocabulary found in literature is better. And it's the kind of vocabulary that is cumulative and allows children someday to get to understand the fundamental principles of our democracy. They can understand Shakespeare, they can understand poetry, they can live richer and fuller lives. And I would submit that in an era where we have a very significant dropout crisis, that the way to engage young people is by challenging them with intellectually engaging, interesting texts that help them understand why life is worth living and why it's important to be a citizen in a democracy. Anyway, so we evaluated these standards, the Common Core standards, against the high standard states and found at every step of the way they were of lower quality. That in alone was disturbing enough for us. But as Emmett mentioned, there was also the Race to the Top contest. And Massachusetts, even though we are the highest performing state in the union, and the people that were pushing Common Core said that this was voluntary, in the first round of Race to the Top, Massachusetts did not adopt Common Core. Our application ranked us as 13 out of 16 in the Race to the Top process. The next round, Massachusetts didn't change its application really much at all, except for one thing. It adopted Common Core. And immediately it went from being 13 to number 1. So that is a very strong illustration that this was not something that was voluntary, it was coercive. They were using a federal grant in order to coerce states to participate. So the next dimension of this that we were very concerned about, building on this issue of whether it was states were voluntarily adopting or not, was looking at the legal issues. Because as mentioned earlier, the tradition for several hundred years in this country is that K-12 education is the jurisdiction of states and localities. The founding fathers were very wise. There's a lot of things that they delegated to the federal government to do, defense and the like. But the key issues that are most intimately connected with parents and teachers and communities, they wisely left to localities and states, whereas there's a more intimate connection. And on top of that, states and localities pay for 90% of it. So they have a very clear personal interest in it and civic interest in it, but on top of that, they're paying for it. The federal government only contributes about 10% of the funding of K-12 education. So we enlisted Ken Talbert, who had been the general counsel in the U.S. Department of Education in the second Bush administration, to have an independent analysis and look at the variety of different ways in which Common Core interacts with federal law. Because for a long time, everybody has known that, or everyone in the policy community, I think people more generally, citizens more generally, understand that it's the purview, K-12 education is the purview of localities and states. So we had Ken Talbert and his law partner take a very, very careful look at it. And what they found, and he'll go into a lot more detail than I am going to, is that they found that this either violates or comes right up next to the edge of violating 3 federal laws. So going back even into the mid-1960s when there was a first foray.
This is the study.
First foray into federal government control or influence on K-12 education. Even then, from the beginning, it was really quite clear that they were supposed to have a limited role and not develop standards or tests or curriculum. So, and Kent will talk about it really within a lot more detail than I will. The next feature of it, because this will impact 40 or 50 million school children, and the states will be paying, and the states and localities will be paying for 90% of it, we thought someone ought to know what this is going to cost. Because none of the proponents of the national standards, not the Governor's Association, not the chief state school officers, not the Gates Foundation, not Achieve, none of these private DC trade organizations had told anybody what it was going to cost. So we thought, hey, it'd be a good idea to take a look at that. We hired another independent researcher from Washington, D.C., who had a long experience in accountability at the state and federal level to take a look at it. I won't go ahead and get into all the details, but what he came up with is it's going to cost about $16 billion. which is essentially an unfunded mandate, because as Emmett laid out in very careful detail, these are things that there are various policy levers that the federal government is using to pull in order to make states participate. So it's going to cost about $16 billion. The biggest driver will be all the additional technology that will go along with the testing for it. And we had an excellent meeting yesterday with the governor and the governor's education advisor, and she assured us that they had done a lot of work on the professional development, which will help train teachers in the Common Core, but there was no discussion at all of what the biggest cost driver was, would be technology, and it would be significant. And I think that we came up with a very fair, moderate estimate. I think we all know that when the federal government gets involved with things, it doesn't tend to be run on the cheaper side. It tends to go quite a bit far beyond what they budget. But, again, they haven't told anybody what it's going to cost. And the people that they haven't told, most notably, are state legislators. So the Obama administration, and primarily through the executive branch and through the governors, they have been driving this, but they have systematically bypassed almost all of the state legislatures in the country. It's kind of odd because, again, these are the people that make the laws. They represent all of you most intimately and closest to your daily lives, and they're the ones that are going to be paying for it. But very few state legislatures in this country have actually voted and passed a bill, and the United States Congress has not passed a bill to develop national standards or tests or curriculum. So I want to be respectful of your time and make sure we leave time for question and answer. But from my point of view, and I think it's certainly true of the history of public education in this country, going back to 1830s in Massachusetts with Horace Mann, who was considered the founding father of public education. The first principle of public education in this country is to teach children and inculcate the basic principles of democracy and the processes by which we're governed. It's exactly the kinds of things at exactly the same kinds of time that Alexis de Tocqueville came in the 1830s. He understood that if this democracy is going to survive, and it's going to be different and materially different from what you see in Europe, that it requires an active, engaged, and well-educated citizenry. Our concern is that Common Core will take parents, it'll take states, it'll take state elected officials out of this, and it'll put it into the responsibility of people who are living thousands of miles away, who are not intimately connected with the lives of our children or your children, and they will have enormous influence about what is taught in the classroom and what your children are tested on. So I would really appeal to you to press your public officials and to keep active on this issue. I think Utah has one of the best chances in the country of pulling out of this before it's too late, and I hope that that's something you'll consider. So here's thank you.
Am I not next?
Oh, yes, sorry.
So I'm Bill Evers, and can everyone hear me? So in some, Emmett's saying I don't need a microphone. Can you hear me? I'll use the microphone. Okay, but that was very nice. So in some of the publicity for this event, it's mentioned that I'm an advisor to Mitt Romney's presidential campaign, which is true. But I'm really not here in that capacity, and nothing I say should be viewed as any kind of official statement of the Mitt Romney for President campaign. I'm really here as a Hoover Institution scholar and somebody who's specialized in standards and accountability. So I'm going to try and focus the way I think about this and share with you how might somebody think about this from a parent or a civically minded taxpayer's point of view. So the first thing I might ask myself on a kind of short-run basis is, are the national standards going to make a positive difference? If Utah has them, are they going to make a positive difference? So I think, if I were at a kitchen table with a spouse, this would be like the immediate question, right? The practical question. So I think it's no. The answer is no, and for three reasons. The first reason is, state standards have already reduced the classroom to classroom teaching quality differences to the extent possible. So there's been a study by a scholar named Tom Lovelace at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., and he says, look, there's not going to be some big achievement gain out of this. The states already have standards that are doing the mechanism that's going to do whatever is going to be doing in this regard in bringing up classroom to classroom quality differences, and it's not going to be noticeable. So there's not going to be any benefit. Okay, that's point one. Now, what about countries that have national standards out there and countries that don't? So the truth of the matter is that most countries in the world are not like the United States. They're a lot more centralized, right? We know that. We're different that way. So the countries that do better than the United States, a lot of them have national standards. But also, almost all the countries that do worse than the United States also have national standards. And the countries that are at our same level pretty much have national standards. So you can't make up your mind from that, right? Okay. But I will tell you the following. There are two countries that are very like the United States, Australia and Canada. Okay, think about it in terms of history and culture. There's a fair amount of similarity if you're comparing countries to the United States. Now, these countries give even less power to their national government than has been taken by the national government in the United States. And interestingly enough, if you go back to the 1960s and the 1970s, Canada and Australia were in kind of the low, middling rank with the United States. But they, without nationalizing this stuff, have climbed through various things that we would take another lecture to get into. But the point is, they have improved without going to national curriculum, without going to national standards. So these are lists of topics and sometimes methods that the teacher is trying to use in the classroom and the kids are supposed to learn. They haven't done this, and yet they have surpassed America. So the evidence in the countries most similar to the United States is, you don't have to do this. You can do well doing other things. So we shouldn't expect this to improve things. Other countries that are even more decentralized than the United States has been since the government has taken more and more authority since the New Deal period in this area, they're doing better. So maybe we should follow them and take education back from the federal government. That would seem to be the lesson. Okay, so my colleagues have talked a bit about the English national standards. So the ones that have come out so far are really English and math. We are expecting national science standards. Some version of that's really out there already. And eventually we're expecting history and social studies national standards. And by the way, the science standards are very flawed. I mean, it's already widely acknowledged. So anyway. But how about the math standards that we already have that your state has already adopted? Okay, so here's what Professor William McCallum of the University of Arizona, and he was one of the 3 writers of the Common Core National Curriculum Content Standards in Math, and of the 3 writers, okay, so don't think that 50 states were out. 50 states plus DC were writing this. These 3 guys wrote them. He was the only mathematician. You might think maybe there should be more. But anyway, he was the only mathematician. And here's what he said. The overall standards are, quote, not high, certainly not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. Okay. So we have it from the horse's mouth, the only mathematician that actually wrote the standards that have been imposed on you in Utah. They're not that good, right? He said it. So when some person from the Chamber of Commerce or from bureaucracy or something says, oh, this is going to help us be more competitive and we'll improve it. What? No. Not better than the East Asian tigers. Korea, Singapore, Japan, Taiwan. We want to do, our kids can do this. You're not doing it. You're less. I mean, Utah, you're less. You have better math standards now than the Common Core. Just to make it crystal clear, right now, kids are on track to learn Algebra 1 in 8th grade in Utah. The National Curriculum Content Standards for Mathematics has them learning Algebra 1 in 9th grade. So they are retarding the progress of your students by 1 full grade. Could it be any clearer than that? And by the way, the most high-performing countries in the world, particularly these East Asian countries that I've been talking about, they have Algebra 1 or the equivalent. We could get into the details in question and answer, but they have their kids learning Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Okay, so if we're going to be internationally competitive, that's what we have to be doing, what Utah's already trying to do. It's not all the way there, and I want to pretend Utah's perfect or anything like that. I'm just saying, you guys were on track to doing the right thing, and you got off the track. You're going backwards by doing this. So let me give you an example of how these coercive utopians are doing stuff. So in geometry, this gets a little technical, but please bear with me. There are some central theorems that have to do with similar and congruent triangles. Now, it's possible that you don't use this in your everyday life. Think back, I'm in geometry class, oh, horrible, horrible. And remember, vaguely, you remember angle, side, angle. Side, angle, side. Okay, you don't really remember what that means anymore, but it kind of resonates, right? So that's what we technically call the algorithm. Well, that means the problem-solving method for dealing with similar and congruent triangles. Okay, so that's the standard algorithm, the way it's been taught for hundreds of years. Okay, well, hey, the national standard aren't going to teach it that way. Okay, so they got a different way. It's a way that's never been successfully used in K-12 education in any country, in any state or province, in any city or locality in the world, ever. Okay? But hey, we're going to do it all across America and all across Utah. Should be no problem, right? They didn't try it out in some small place. No, they're going to do it to everybody. Okay? So it is taught to math majors in college. Okay? This method. So good luck. You guys will be hearing more about this. Any of you have high school students or students who will be in high school. All right, so then that's the practical thing. Okay? We can't expect improvements. The countries that have national standards are not doing any better. Some that have decentralized systems, have things more or less like the United States or what the United States used to be, are doing better than the United States. Your state of Utah is better than the national standards, and the national standards themselves are not that good. So that's like the immediate, short-term, practical reason to say, heck no to this. All right, now what about the long term? What about the health of our constitutional republic? And I think any parent who's thinking about their children and their grandchildren is thinking about the larger environment and the long-term perspective, and my colleagues are also bringing this up, as you've already heard. So we have a system of protection and checks and balances to guard our liberties, okay? So we want to have freedom of individuals and families. We have special regard for that in the United States. There's a reason sometimes people use the phrase American exceptionalism. This is a major part of our political history and our political culture. Now, what is federalism? We have a federal system. What is federalism? Well, it's sort of a dual, the bigger version of it is it's a dual system of a national government and state governments. And they each kind of float on their own bottom. They They both collect taxes. They both have jurisdiction over certain topics, and the other ones don't. Now, unfortunately, since the New Deal, this has been smushed together in certain ways, and this Common Core National Curriculum Content Standards is a big example of destroying the federal system. Now, you heard about federalism in the Obamacare case, okay? So this is partly what's at issue, and the feds are trying to throw things. But an interesting feature of this recent Obamacare decision is that the justices decided 7-2, that using conditional grants and aid, technical term, but basically it means like, we give you this highway money, you have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, okay? That's a conditional grant and aid. We, the feds, taking your taxpayers' money, give you this taxpayers' money, some of which has been collected from Utah people, and in return, you have a 55-mile. So they're doing that in education policy. We give you this money, you adopt the national standards and national tests, okay? So they voted 7-2, so it was people who were on both, you know, the Roberts side and the dissent side, concurred that the forcible extension of Medicare, making the states expand Medicare, was coercive and a violation of the fundamental federal principles of the American Constitution. So why do we have federalism? I mean, I've sort of gotten at it, but another case, not Obamacare, but a 2011 case having to do with criminal justice, said, the justice that wrote the opinion said, we don't have a single government in charge of everything, because by not doing that, we get an additional protection from arbitrary power, okay? You can move from one place to another if something is too intrusive. And it provides for competition among the states. So some of the great books on federalism, such as Federalism and Political Culture by Aaron Wildavsky, or such as American Federalism, Competition Among Governments by Thomas R. Dye. So instead of the feds usurping things, instead of the feds presiding over cartels of interstate cooperation, of interstate kind of conglomeration together, we have rivalry among the states. We get a better product. We get a better service. We get closer to the preferences of the individual voter. So I just wanted to read you something from a larger monograph that I'm writing. So federalism is not only the distinction and rivalry between the federal government and the states, but also the rivalry among the states and among local governments within the states. So I want to read you a quote from economist Richard McKenzie, and he writes, the founders sought to disperse power, quote, among many different and competing governments at the federal, state, and local levels, close quote. The insight of competitive federalism is that the 51 state school boards are better than a single federal executive branch office. 15,000 local school boards are better than either 51 state school boards or a single federal office. So this creates competition among the states and localities to the benefit of all the citizens of the country. So I'm quoting from myself, except from where I was quoting from Richard McKenzie. And thank you for applauding both Mr. McKenzie and I. But the point is, this is the founder's design. It's not something that I created. It's actually the wise tradition that we have in our country. So what I want to say is that federal usurpation of state activity or interstate cartels, actually Governor Nikki Haley of South Carolina said, we in South Carolina don't want the federal government or a consensus of states telling us what to do. So either way you want to look at it, The feds have a lot to do with this national standards and national testing. They're pouring millions and millions of dollars into it. But the actual wording of the standards, which are these lists of topics and sometimes methods that are going to be happening in the classroom, the federal government did not write. I acknowledge that. But they're imposing them on the states anyway, even though they didn't originate them. So there's a phrase, and this is slightly cutesy, but I call it the immaculate deception. So the idea is, well, they were born immaculately, they weren't done by the federal government, so they must still be that way. Well, no, if the federal government is imposing them on the states, they become a federal government thing, even if they weren't in their origination. And I think we can all understand that. It's the trick, though, that they are trying to pull the wool over our eyes by focusing on, oh, the feds didn't write it. Well, so what? The feds are imposing it on us. And we don't want it, whether it's viewed as the feds or an interstate cartel. It's taking away something that can be close and can be fixed if there are problems at the Utah level. So Madison and the others who wrote our constitutional system of federalism realized that it's better to have things at the state and local level where it can match voters' preferences to the policies that are in effect. That this improves government performance through competitive pressure, and it protects our individual liberty from arbitrary power. This is the long-term thinking that has to go around the kitchen table by parents, by taxpayers who care about civic virtue in our society. And the Common Core standards run counter to both the practical academic success of our children and to the success of this country as a constitutional republic. So what is at stake here are our children's futures and our constitutional liberties.
A few minutes ago, you heard mention of literature by Jamie, and he also had mentioned Shakespeare, allusion to Shakespeare. Let me first start by telling you what I will not talk about. I will not talk about what Shakespeare said about lawyers. That's probably what he said. First thing to do is kill all lawyers.
One of his characters said that. Right?
What I will talk about...
Actually a bad guy. I want to stay friends with some lawyers.
You've heard a lot about context tonight. What I will talk about is content from a legal perspective, and that is I will discuss 3 education laws, what they have to say about prohibiting the federal government from being involved in developing, supervising, or controlling curriculum. And then after that, I'll talk briefly about several of the things you've already heard about, the Common Core standards. I'll briefly allude to those. I'll talk about Race to the Top, the different iterations of that. Then I'll talk about the conditional waivers under No Child Left Behind, as you've probably heard and read about recently, and those you talk and applied for and received a waiver. And then I'll wrap it all up with a conclusion. And proceeding in that order, what the Pioneer Institute asked our firm to do was to look at these things, to look at Race to the Top, to look at the Common Core standards, to look at the assessments that are being developed to go along with the standards, to look at the conditional waivers under No Child Left Behind, and sort of analyze that from sort of a big picture view and in the aggregate, and determine, what are the legal issues here, and are there prospectively any laws being violated, or is the department coming pretty close to the edge on the curriculum statute. Our conclusion as we looked at all of these programs in the aggregate was that the Department of Education, through various actions that it's taken in recent years, has put the country on the road to a national curriculum. And I'll explain how we came to that conclusion. In fact, some might say that, you know, the country has already crossed the line toward the Fed's developing, controlling, and supervising national curriculum. I'm not sure that's the case. As you look at all these things in the aggregate, they've come pretty close, but I'm not sure we're there yet, but we will be very soon if things continue along the current track that they're on. First of all, the 3 laws. The Department of Education Organization Act was enacted in 1979, and it basically established the Department of Education as an independent entity. And it came into existence really in 1980. The law was passed in 79. And prior to that, the Department of Education had been a part of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and was essentially a bureau within that larger agency. And the Department of Education Organization Act has some provisions in there that kind of sort out the federalism issue and says, these are the things that the federal Department of Education will be involved in, and these are the things that are left for state and local governments. And one of the items included in the Department of Education Organization Act is a provision that says, in essence, the federal government shall not be involved in developing, supervising, or controlling instructional materials or curriculum. That's sort of the simple version. It's a little more than that, but that's the essence of it. Now, very similar to that is the General Education Provisions Act, which, as you would expect by the name of the title of the Act, General Education Provisions Act, it deals with administrative and other general provisions that govern the various K-12 and higher ed programs that send money out to the states and to the school districts. And again, it has a similar provision that basically says, you know, the Department of Education, federal agencies, and so forth shall not be involved in developing, supervising, or controlling curriculum or instructional materials. And then the third law is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was first enacted in 1965 and most recently amended by the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001. That statute, which again only applies to K-12 education, it has a provision similar to the DPOA, the Department of Ed Organization Act, and the General Education Provisions Act, again prohibiting the feds from being involved in directing, controlling, and supervising curriculum. But it's only limited to that, to money that's provided under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So we have that as the first point. We have these 3 federal statutes, all very similar. Now, hold that aside as we look at, again, at the Common Core standards briefly, race to the top assessments, and the conditional waivers under No Child Left Behind. You've heard already about the Common Core standards, what they're about. Currently, the Common Core standards are in English and mathematics. If things continue along the track, there'll be other subjects for which standards will be developed, and you can guess, you know, what some of those subjects might be. But right now, it's just English and math. And you have these states that, in essence, have agreed that these will be the common standards. Race to the top, you heard earlier from Emmett, was $4.3 billion, a significantly large sum of money relative to prior years that the federal government had put forward for this single discretionary grant program, Race to the Top. And the Race to the Top program, in essence, attaches conditions to the money, the $4.3 billion that goes out and that states competed for. And I know Utah competed for it, but unfortunately it did not win the grant. But there were a handful of states that did win.
Fortunately.
Fortunately.
It's bad enough what happened. It could have been worse.
But in any event, they competed for it. The money went out, but there are conditions attached to receiving the Race to the Top money. A couple of those conditions are that you must have and demonstrate that you're developing common standards, and also that you're developing common assessments.
Even to apply for the money, you have to do
in English and math, and that's to apply for it. So you have that. And then similarly, there is what's called the Race to the Top assessment program. And in essence, this refers to a Department of Education program that is currently funding the development of these English and math assessments that will match up, in essence, with the common standards. And so what you had was money that was appropriated from the federal government that went to the Department of Education, and then they held a competition for states or consortia to compete for that money to develop these common assessments. You had two consortia, a Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, of which Utah is a member. Utah's an advisory member. They're not a full member, they're an advisory member, so basically they can sort of serve as an advisor to the group and be aware of what's going on and go to the meetings, but they don't have the same rights and authority that other states have that are full members of that consortium in the development of the test. There's also another consortium. The acronym is PARCC, P-A-R-C-C. It's very lengthy, but in any event, they also receive part of the $360 million that was sent out to these two consortia to do the development work of these assessments that we heard about earlier in English and math. And again, these assessments will be done, they're computer-based, and so that will be one of the significant expenses that will be incurred by state and local jurisdictions. So you have that, and that's the federal link that I want to come back to with respect to the three statutes about federal curriculum. So you've got about $360 million, or a little bit over that went out to these two consortia to develop the assessment. So the Department of Education wrote the requirements in their notice that they put out for receiving the grant. And so, you have the two consortia that submit their applications. They say they do this, that, and the other, according to what was in the announcement, a notice announcement about the money that would be available. And then they received the money and began doing their work. And so you have the U.S. Department of Education, the federal government, involved in essentially, through the writing of the grant notice materials and directing how the work is to be done, you have them sort of directing and controlling the assessments. You also, and I'll come back to that in just a minute, you also have these conditional waivers under No Child Left Behind, which you've heard about. And in essence, in the conditional waivers, states can apply for and receive relief from the 2014 requirement that all students have.
This is very complicated, so listen to this. In 2001, they created a new version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is the main federal aid education act. And one of the provisions in it is that the kids are supposed to get to a proficient level, as judged by the states, by 2014. They're not going to do this. So using the possible penalties connected to that as the gun, they're doing these conditional waivers. That's what he's talking about.
So a number of months ago, the Department of Education announced that states could apply for and receive waivers from some of the provisions of No Child Left Behind that the states found onerous, such as the 2014 deadline. I should also mention, in terms of full disclosure, the 2014 deadline for being at proficiency, it's really being at grade level, that you'll have all students at grade level by 2014. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this. But nevertheless, in terms of the trajectories of getting all students to that point, many states are having difficulty staying on target to get to that level by 2014. And so in any event, the waiver notices went out. A number of states applied for waivers. They received the grants of the waivers. But attached to the waivers were several conditions which are actually not a part of the waiver statute, and they're not anywhere else to be found in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That's where the waiver statute is in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so in essence, what you had is you had one set of requirements in No Child Left Behind being replaced by another set of requirements in these conditions that are added on to the waiver request. In other words, to get a waiver, you have to meet these certain conditions that really are not, they're not found in the law, they're not found in the regulations, they're not found in the sub-regulatory guidance.
So you would say they are writing statutes through the back door that are not written by Congress.
Nevertheless, so you have this framework for the waivers, and states are having difficulty meeting the requirements of No Child Left Behind. And obviously there's federal money that comes down to fund Title I and all the other programs under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So they naturally would seek relief, and states have cut back on their funding in education as a general notion. So the waivers provided some relief, but it also added these other requirements. A couple of the conditions that are attached to the waivers are that you must have, a set of common standards and common assessments. So where does that leave us, and how does this all tie together? Well, through all these different programs that I just talked about, you in essence, you have the Common Core standards, which is not, a federal program per se, as in the Race to the Top assessment program, Race to the Top, but nevertheless, you have these common standards, and then you have common assessments that are being developed. So if you have the common standards and common assessments, naturally, the curriculum will follow from that, and so states and locals will need to modify that curriculum to match up with the assessments, which will also be aligned to the standards. And so, the question becomes whether, states wish to retain their autonomy to choose what their standards are and what their assessments are, or whether they wish to be part of a larger sort of collective group in making a decision about that, and the consequences that flow from that if not everyone agrees, and working out all the details and those kinds of things. And so there's some giving up of autonomy, or significant autonomy, in being a part of the consortium, being part of the Common Core standards. But again, the curriculum follows from the assessments and the standards that are aligned to one another. And so, back to the 3 federal laws that prohibit the feds from being involved in directly supervising and controlling curriculum. They're not directly, in our view, as we look at all this, they're not directly doing that, but it's more indirect in the sense that, they're providing money for the development of these assessments under Race to the Top. You've got the Common Core standards that already exist. And so, sort of indirectly, they are influencing what will happen in terms of curriculum and the modification of curriculum to the extent that's necessary to match up with the common standards and common assessments. And so our conclusion, again, that we came to in our paper that we did for the Pioneer Institute was that when you look at all these things in the aggregate, the conclusion we came to is that all of these things collectively have put the country on the road to having a national curriculum or a common curriculum, at least amongst all those states, and it's 40-plus states that are a part of the consortia and also a part of the standards. Now, this really doesn't come fully to fruition until 2014. That's when the assessments that I spoke about earlier are due to come online. In terms of the timeline, the assessments come online in 2014. So between now and then, what you're seeing take place is teachers are being trained, locally, and the states involved in some of this, contractors are involved in some of this across the country. They're being trained, to be able to teach to the common standards, and then you have the assessments and so forth. And then, so you're having the professional development going on, but then you're also having adjustments that are being or will be made to curriculum to match up. So again, sort of the bottom line that we came to is that all these things together have put the country on the road to a national curriculum, and these 3 federal laws prohibit the federal government from being involved in that and doing that, because that is a state and local matter. There is, one final point I would mention is, there is, and this relates to the conditional waiver issue. There is a bill that's been introduced in the House of Representatives and acted upon by the House Education and Workforce Committee that reported from committee. It's not been approved by the full House yet. H.R. 3989 is called the Student Success Act. But in essence, it as a result of what's happened with the waivers and the conditions being added to it by the executive branch, it would prohibit that kind of thing from taking place. In other words, you can only you can seek to get a waiver, but the executive branch cannot will add conditions to the waivers that are not a part of the statute or the regulations or the sub-regulatory guidelines. So again, that's our conclusion that we came to.
We want to thank you, and we have an opportunity for question and answers. Before we do that, I just want to say a couple things. You may be thinking, now what, right? What am I supposed to do about this? I was right there with you. And my representative up there probably has gotten more emails and phone calls, and I thank him for coming, than he would like to have gotten in the past several months from many of the people up where I live. And talk to them. Talk to your neighbors. I can't believe how many neighbors don't have any idea what the word Common Core is. They don't have any idea. I talked to a reporter the other day, and she said they already vetted this. They already let the public know. I said, I have 6 kids in the public school, and I did not know about it until it was done. So if you have problems with this like I do, and you have many questions, do some research, look and see if what these men are saying are true, and then call the governor, call him tomorrow and tell him we want out. I have his number. Hold on a minute. Think of your questions. My husband is going to do that for you. Oh, I'll write it up on board, that way you don't have to wait. Okay, so call him tomorrow. And if you don't know tomorrow if you want out, call him when you figure it out. But make sure it's not too late. Because the more money we put into this, the harder it's going to be to get out, because it's going to be hard to turn this monster around. Let's do question answer, and then we need to close out like 5 till, and I'll have Margaret Hayden come up.
Elisa, real quickly, and they can go to your website, Utahns Against Common Core.
Thank you.
And I would say truthinamericaneducation.com also has a lot of information on this.
Truthinamericaneducation.com. All one word.
All the Pioneer studies are there, and they're also on the Pioneer website. Pioneer and American Principles Project produced this manuscript, Controlling Education from the Top, Why Common Core is Bad for America. It's a primer on the Common Core and on the process, so it cites the other authorities as well. So that would be a good starting point. Question up there.
We're glad to see you're not using cursive there.
Yes, I didn't learn it. I'm just kidding.
Okay, shall we take we've got an eager question.
Yes, who has the mic for the question?
Oak's going to ask a question.
And then I have a question as well. Some of you may or may not be familiar with a little bit of the math history in Utah. And as they were talking, particularly Bill had mentioned the map that we have now. Let me just clarify that the map that we have right now is Common Core math that has been adopted. But what he was trying to say was the
2007
map that was in place from 2007 until we adopted Common Core was highly rated for math standards nationally. And so just to clarify for anybody that was confused by the timeline there. I actually have one question for you, Emmett. You mentioned the federal government brought all the states together at the beginning of this process, invited them there to a meeting. Who paid for the states to actually attend that meeting? Do you know? Because I've heard that it was the federal government that actually paid to bring the states together to that initial meeting to sign on to national standards.
I don't know, but we'll look into it.
So, my name is Greg Gerlach from Eagle Mountain. I have a comment and question. One of the reasons that we landed in this mess is because the State Office of Education is not listening. The reason they aren't listening is because of the way they're constituted. In our state, there's a board of 15 that determine who goes on the ballot in the State Board of Education. Those 15 are chosen by the governor, and they currently vet any candidates. First question on the questionnaire is, do you support Common Core? So it has been proposed that we change that, and that the parties send names for the State Office of Education. I wanted to ask the question, do you think that's a better mechanism than having a board appointed by governor do that?
Yeah, I think it's better, but I mean, bear in mind the Republican Party, I would say, has largely across the nation advocated education.
Well, I still have hope for the Republican Party. I do want to say, remember the California State Republican Central Committee and whatever. So the point is, yes, we're all imperfect. We're all sinners. Institutions are weak. They're not as strong as we'd like them to be. They're not as effective as we would like them to be. We have 50 states. Every state is different. It sounds like there's some serious imperfections that you might want to try a different thing, but don't think that will be perfect either. It really depends on holding the appointed, and it sounds like the governor has a huge political responsibility for this. So it sounds like, and that's all. I'm really not here to tell you that. All I'm saying is you need to hold the relevant decision makers' feet to the fire, and if that really doesn't work, then you need a replacement. So every system, even an alternative to the one that you currently have, is going to have somebody picking and some choice mechanism and so forth. They're not going to work perfectly. You still have to put you have to have an informed public, not just a reactive public, but an informed public that responds to their errors if they're making errors.
So in Massachusetts, we have an appointed, the governor has the authority to appoint members of the Board of Education, and those terms are staggered over time. At least they're supposed to be staggered over time so that no one governor has complete control of the Board of Ed. That said, our current governor reconstituted the Board of Education a couple years ago, and that's why we adopted Common Core. So there's no kind of
there's no perfect
formula for this. I mean, I have a preference for my Massachusetts because I like the appointed board better. But you know, it's interesting. So back starting in January, we started sending the Utah Board of Education all of the op-eds that appear in newspapers in Massachusetts. George Will did a column on Kent's paper. What's that? So we have been sending the op-eds to, and all of our research and all the work that we've done, we've been sending it to the Utah State Board of Education. One board member responded to me one time back in April or May and said, don't send this to our Board of Ed. They're going to get the sense that this is a bad idea. And I just emailed back to her and said, it's not only a bad idea, it's probably illegal.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions.
Emmett's going to have one of you answer because...
Yeah, you assign it. You assign it to one of us.
Thank you for coming.
You assign it. Pick a few yourself, but don't pick them all.
For some of us here, this train that you're dealing with left the station a long time ago. I'd like a show of hands of the homeschoolers in the audience here, if there are any. So, I was hoping my wife and I weren't the only representatives of this group of people, that for a lot of us, this discussion is not so relevant, except for the fact that we better support the people that are the poor, unfortunate souls that are still captured in this conveyor belt, as Sir Ken Robinson calls it. All right, the question is, you've got half or a good 2/5 of the audience here that are homeschoolers. Please address our issues and why we should even be here.
Thank you. I'll give that one to me, and I'll promise I won't give any other ones to me. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association is one of the most powerful and active members in Truth American Education, which is opposed to all of that.
And signed the closing the door on innovation.
And they signed closing the door on innovation. And the reason is because they have seen, profit-like, that a single system of education that's top-down, not parent-driven, not local-driven, is going to affect college education
and it's going to affect admission to college. So if you have a change in curriculum, if you have a change in how children are measured, then when it comes time for homeschool children to apply for college, they're going to be at a disadvantage in terms of where they naturally would be due to their superior education. They're going to be at a disadvantage in getting into college and winning scholarships and things of that nature. And now, about a month ago, one of the key architects of the Common Core, a fellow named David Coleman, was named president of the College Board, which writes the SATs and is in charge of the AP. And he said, well, what we need to do now is line SATs with the College Core. So,
Common Core.
This is an American issue. This affects everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so for those in line, have your question ready and keep it to 15 seconds because we have a lot of people that want to talk.
Chelsea Woodruff, candidate for Senate District 1. I am a Master's of Education teacher candidate, and the biggest issue that I see is training of teachers to align to the standards. It's not replacing the standards. So you guys didn't really address the training of teachers and the costs and the time and how Common Core is changing the training of teachers.
Jamie Lynch,
Let me just pull something out here. So as I mentioned, the biggest cost driver for Common Core is the technology used for the testing. But one of the other big cost drivers, in addition to textbooks and everything like that, is professional development. And the figure that we came up with for professional development, for training teachers to align with Common Core, is $5.2 billion. Yep. No, not for state, not for the state, for the entire, all the states.
I would like Emmett or whoever else on the panel could address the problems of data collection at the federal level, the invasion of privacy, how FERPA is being changed. We have a state FERPA. We worked very hard in the mid-90s to pass here. It's very specific, and I think we need to be more aware of how these regulations are being violated.
How about Ken?
The question relates to, in essence, state longitudinal data systems that you may have read about.
And what is FERPA?
And also
and what is
the Family
FERPA?
Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which protects, is supposed to protect the privacy of student education records, and particularly personally identifiable information that's in student education records. The federal government has, over the last few years, has provided money to the states to develop state longitudinal data systems, and these goes from like pre-K up to grade 12, and then also on up to P16, P20. And so states right now are in the process of developing these longitudinal data systems that will go all the way, in essence, through college, and the data systems will include basically student education records in essence. And in most cases, there are state statutes that have been written that govern the development at the state level of the longitudinal data systems. And so unlike in the past, I mean, there are a handful of states that have done it on their own in the past, but now you've got this incentive money coming from the federal government to develop longitudinal data systems. The data systems are controlled by the state, but nevertheless, you have all these records and so forth and data that'll be in one place. And the question then becomes, well, who has access to this data? The mention was of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, again, which basically protects the privacy of student education records. And in December of 2011, the Department of Education issued regulations which, in essence, turned the statute, which is supposed to protect student education records and personally identifiable information. It sort of turns it on its head, under the notion that data should be able to be shared with researchers, for example, for studies, for evaluations, for audits, and these kinds of things involving federal and state programs. And And so, the question becomes, one is a legal matter, whether the regulations go beyond the scope of the statute. But more importantly, there's what will happen is the data will be shared with researchers and others who are doing studies, evaluations of federal programs, and things like this. And it can be shared without getting the consent of the student or the parent if the student is still under 18 years old. And again, this is in the public schools and so forth. So in any event, that's the concern. And again, a lot of these data systems are still coming online, and states are developing them. But one tangible example is that a school district or a state educational agency or the State Department of Education that has data would be able to share it, for example, without consent of the student or parent, with a State Department of Labor or the workforce agency for the department. So, and
this is a huge change.
Policies. I mean, somebody say, well, yeah, it's good to have this sort of thing so we can see what the data is showing, how students are doing, that kind of thing. But I'm not going into the policy. I'm just saying, it's up to people to decide the policy.
I've been struggling over the distinction between literature and informative text. And while I support the teaching of great literature in schools, I also think there's a place for not computer manuals necessarily, but for works, non-narrative works like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, political philosophy. What is your position on that?
Okay. So I think, my own view, and informed by what we did in Massachusetts, is that English belongs in English standards, so literature belongs in English standards, and historical text, belongs in history standards. What Common Core really does is that it cuts enormously the amount of literature that's in English language arts standards, and then it puts it in, then the bulk of what's going to be studied is informational text, which from my point of view can mean everything and nothing. It can be Federal Reserve catalogs or manuals, computer manuals, but I think that making it clear, using language to make it clear what it is that's in English standards is probably the best route to go. I will say that Common Core has put the founding documents into English language standards, as we did in Massachusetts, but where they really, really belong and where real historical and narrative texts belong are in history standards.
Okay, can you speak a little bit about the process of withdrawal? Can we withdraw this time? If we do, what would the cost of the process of withdrawal be, and what would it cost the state to withdraw? What's economically at stake right now?
I'll answer the first part as to whether or not you can withdraw. The answer to that is clearly yes. This is your power, your major sovereign power. You have these semi-contractual MOUs with the federal government, and those are really in the nature of the analogy, I think, is treaties. A treaty between the federal government and another country. The federal government can break that whenever it wants, under its sovereign power, to get out of any agreement it enters into. Same thing with the states. The states agreement with the federal government in an area that's not governed by the supremacy clause, the state can get out of it at any time. Now, what will happen if the Obama administration is still in power? They may make it uncomfortable. They may do like they did with Texas, which was to send auditors into the State Department of Education to look at all their programs. They're heavy-handed. They may do like with South Carolina, which is send really obnoxious letters, publish obnoxious letters. I think the question comes down, is this a fight worth having? And the answer to that is clearly yes.
The only point I would add is under Utah law, obviously you'll need to determine who has authority under Utah law to make the decision to withdraw. Is it the state legislature, for example, or is it the State Board of Education? I'm not sure what Utah law says and what the state constitution says, but certainly you can withdraw from the Common Core Standards Initiative. You can withdraw from the SBAC Assessment Consortium. If you decide you don't want the waiver anymore, presumably you can, the state superintendent of education, or can send a letter and saying we're ready to go back to No Child Left Behind and not the waiver with these conditions attached. So anyway,
they would like to address the penalties or costs to that.
Well, Utah didn't get any money from the race to the top. This is part of the thing you had to commit to, regardless of whether you got money. They didn't get any.
But what about Title I funds?
Title I funds, Obama has threatened to tie Title I to adoption of his policies, but that would take an act of Congress. Well, maybe not with Obama.
He can't wait for Congress, so he
He'll issue a letter in order when the Senate goes out to lunch. That gets to is this a fight worth having? I don't know. If the Constitution is worth having, I think it's a fight worth having.
So you're saying it's no cost? Is that what you're saying? We can just leave with impunity?
we don't know, but it
Nobody has done it successfully.
no, that's right. No, this is a brand new thing. So, is this on? Is this on? Okay, so Ken and I sat in the U.S. Department of Education, in the inner circles of it.
A lady right here had a good point. If they did do the Title I penalty like he suggested,
Right.
the cost to withdraw would still be less than the cost of implementing the program.
I think that's true, but it's a political decision on the part of the administration, whatever administration is in power. Do they want to do something that would pick a fight over this? And historically, they don't do that. If there are penalties, they're usually pretty small. You agree?
Just real quick again, the question becomes, what would you be withdrawing from? Are you withdrawing from the Common Core Standards Initiative? Are you withdrawing from the SBAC consortia that's, the group of states developing the assessments? Or are you pulling back from the waiver? And then I think that'll depend upon what sort of
Result you have also. How you're doing also.
First on the, the Common Core State Standards, that's separate. I mean, that doesn't tie into Title I money, at least not at this point in time. The assessments, you're part of the consortia, they'll continue to develop the test even if one chooses to pull out. I don't see how you can be penalized for that unless there's some language in the governance documents that Utah signed when they joined up with the consortia that somehow say, you got to do this, that, and the other if you pull out. I don't see how the feds can put any restriction upon you. On the waivers, it's an interesting question, but the waivers simply relieve you from requirements. It's not really dealing with money. And so it seems where you would be is, if you decide you don't want that anymore, you're back under regular No Child Left Behind, and whether you can be in compliance with that. If you're not in compliance with that, then the question becomes whether they would try to bring any enforcement action against the state. I don't think they would, but that's an open question.
That's a very good answer.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, but please, they're available. We don't have to leave right away to go up and talk. It's just the people that need to leave.
Okay, my question summarizes what this meeting is about. Basically, we need to get Governor Herbert on board on kicking out, or refusing the Common Core. I'm cynical about it because he attempted passing a bill giving himself final authority on educational decisions over the state school board. It failed, but he attempted to do that. Now, I heard that you folks had a meeting with him yesterday, and my question is, how did that meeting go? Can you report?
It was a private meeting.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a private meeting, so I think we should, yeah, keep that in confidence. If I were you.
Record meeting.
Yeah. Well, what I would do is I would really focus on your state legislators. That's where I would focus, because they're the ones who really, they have the ability to not only pay for this, but they can pass legislation to pull you out. And then that really forces the governor's hand. And I mean, my sense is that he's not entirely clear what direction he wants to go with this. But a strong message from the legislature will, I think, compel both the State Board of Education and the governor to act on it.
Here's my sense of it. I think you all have a wonderful legislature. I think they really like to hear from you. I mean that honestly, and I think if you let them know your views, then I think they'll act. I think they'll raise the shield to defend the Constitution.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like the ultimate goal is to let your voices be heard. I need to say my final voice as I'm closing the meeting, is that I need to thank all of you again for coming. I appreciate Lisa and all who have worked with her organizing this. I especially appreciate these gentlemen who have come to our state to share their expertise. Not only did I get to enjoy this meeting tonight, I sat with several legislators at a lunch meeting today where they spoke to us. I was also in the meeting yesterday with the governor. My consensus of the overall situation is that Common Core is too common for Utah. You know that I led the bill to have Utah opt out of No Child Left Behind, and I am forever about maintaining the constitutionality and the way it's set up and keeping the federal government out of our state. And thanks to all of you, and we will look forward to talking again.